Ghosting has become one of the most talked about, the most ridiculed, the most misunderstood behaviors in modern relationships. It's, it's seen as immature, as cowardly, as even cruel, and sometimes it is. Sometimes ghosting is a way to avoid accountability and to dodge discomfort and to disappear when things get really hard. And that's real, that's life. But sometimes it's also seen as something else entirely, I think. Sometimes ghosting isn't malicious. It's more of this collapse. See, sometimes it's not a decision to harm. It's more like the body going into protection mode. It's the nervous system that's overloaded and the heart that's tangled up in shame and a mind that doesn't really know how to hold another conversation without breaking. And sometimes we don't ghost people because we don't care. I think we ghost them because we do care. But the weight of our own pain and our own guilt and our own fear, it just swallows our voice before we can even speak. And so we vanish, not proudly, not freely, not easily, but quietly and reluctantly and shamefully. And in the silence, I think we lose more than the connection. We also lose a bit of ourselves as well. Here at Bintegers, I want to center everything around integrity and intimacy. How to live in alignment with our values and how to let ourselves be seen. And ghosting, especially when it's driven by overwhelm, puts both of these two under extreme pressure. Because in those moments, we want to be the people of integrity. I mean, we want to show up, we want to respond, but our system is so flooded to even find the right words. And we can't meet others because we're still trying to meet ourselves. And this internal dissonance becomes quite unbearable. And so we pull back. And then once we've pulled back, we just stay gone. Because re entry just feels impossible. Because the longer that we're gone, the harder it becomes to explain. Because what would we even say? I disappeared because I was ashamed. I didn't text back because I felt like I was breaking. I wanted to show up, I just didn't know how. It feels weak. It feels messy. And we assume that people will never understand. And so we stay quiet and the shame compounds. But the truth is, the act of ghosting, while painful, is rarely as heartless as it appears, I think. Oftentimes, it seems to me like more of a trauma response. Not necessarily from the person that we're ghosting, but just from life, from our own backlog of emotional debris that we have yet to attend to, from the unprocessed weight that we've been carrying for far too long, and, and from years of not knowing how to voice our pain, from moments of betrayal that we never healed, and from the inner critic that's screaming that we are unworthy of connection in the first place at all. And so when something happens, like an argument or a truth has been revealed, a mistake made, our system just short circuits. And the guilt becomes a flood. And the fear becomes this wall. And even though the door is open, we can't really walk through it. And so we just choose to vanish. And then the labels come. They ghosted me. They never cared. They were a coward. And sometimes those labels may be fair, whereas other times they may not be. And what's always true is this, though. See, behind the ghosting, there's always a story. A story about fear, a story about shame, a story about overwhelm, a story about someone who wanted to connect and just did not know how to connect. And so in this episode, we're going to tell those stories, okay? We're going to name the truth behind the silence. Not to excuse the pain that ghosting causes, but to humanize the people who have been doing it. because some of us are carrying deep guilt for the times that we disappeared. And we're not proud of it. We think about the people that we left, and we wonder how they felt. So we tell ourselves that we're terribly awful people for leaving. And underneath all of this, we just wish that someone would understand that we aren't running from them. We're running from the weight of what we couldn't face. And that's the work that we're doing here. Not to glorify ghosting, but to understand what happens when the heart wants what the heart wants, and that's to stay. But the systems that we're working with just shut down. See, ghosting is not always a conscious decision. Sometimes it's a freeze, right? It's the opposite of flight, right? The opposite of flight is it's this third F, the freeze. Our body's ancient defense system that's stepping in to say, this is too much, we're not safe, so we're gonna shut her down. And from the outside, it looks like indifference, like abandonment, like carelessness. But on the inside, it feels like we're drowning in this shame with no air that's left for words. And that's what makes ghosting so painful, not just for the person who's left behind, but also for the person who's disappearing. Because many of us don't leave lightly. We leave because staying feels like a collapse that we won't be able to survive. See, my story speaks directly into this. When I came clean about cheating on my wife, I didn't just fracture our relationship, it actually shattered my sense of self. See, the moment I admitted the truth, this tidal wave of guilt rushed in. And for months afterwards, I was just gone. Not physically, but emotionally and relationally and socially. I ghosted my family. I ghosted my close friends. I disappeared from the people who mattered most to me. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared so much and the shame was unbearable. And it wasn't premeditated per se. It wasn't calculated. It was a form of collapse. The weight of what I'd done and what I was feeling, it eclipsed my ability to stay connected. And there were no words that felt honest enough. There's no apology that felt sufficient. And there's no version of myself that felt safe to be seen. And so silence felt like the only option. And that's what so few people understand, I believe. Sometimes ghosting is just this unspoken grief. And we don't know how to explain the intensity of what we're feeling. We don't have the emotional vocabulary. We don't have the nervous system capacity. And so we go quiet. We go away. And we stay gone longer than we ever meant to. And yes, it hurts people deeply, but it also hurts us. Because the longer we stay gone, the more unworthy we feel to ever come back. And that spiral is vicious. We start believing that the person we ghosted is better off, that we're beyond redemption, that our silence has already done the irreversible damage. And so we choose distance, not because we want it, but because we think we no longer deserve closeness. That's what shame does. It separates us from the very people who might still be willing to love us, if only we knew how to re-engage. And here's what's even more heartbreaking. So many of us who ghost others when we're overwhelmed are the same people who deeply value connection, who long for authenticity and who want to repair but don't know where to start. So we beat ourselves up for not responding. We draft the messages and then we never send it. We check our profile and say nothing. And we imagine what we'd say if we had the courage. And then we bury those words again. Because re-entry requires this level of vulnerability that feels unbearable in the moment. But the truth is, repair is almost always still possible. It's not guaranteed, but it's possible. And more than that, it's desperately needed. Because staying gone doesn't just protect others from our mess, it actually keeps us from healing. So we remain trapped in our own emotional prison, falsely believing that silence is this price that we must pay for our mistakes. But healing doesn't really happen in hiding, does it? Healing happens in honesty. And even if the relationship doesn't resume, even if they never respond, the act of showing up can be profoundly redemptive, not just for them, but also for us as well. It reminds us that we are still worthy of connection, even after a collapse, that we are still allowed to speak even after silence, that we are still human even after we've hurt someone that we love. The question is, how do we find our way back though? That's what we're going to start to explore next year. Not just the why we ghost, but how we even begin to re-emerge with integrity, with accountability, with the kind of honesty that makes space again for connection. See, the longer that we're silent, the heavier the return becomes. It doesn't matter if it's been a few days, a few weeks, even a few years. See, once the silence sets in, it takes on a life of its own. And this gap grows louder, the guilt grows deeper, and the story that we tell ourselves becomes even more punishing. And we start to believe that we don't deserve to come back, that the people we hurt have surely moved on, or worse, they've written us off. We assume that our absence has spoken for us, saying, I don't care, I gave up, I'm too broken to even try. But what if we challenge that story? What if, instead of assuming our silence means we're unworthy, we instead recognize it as a trauma echo, a moment of overwhelm that froze us in place? What if we could re-enter with softness? Not to fix everything, not to be excused, but just so that we can be human again. See, here's where integrity becomes essential, because integrity doesn't mean we never disappear. Integrity means that we take responsibility when we do disappear. It means we don't let shame have the final say. We can actually begin with just a few words, not as an explanation, but as a signal of life. Something even as simple as, I know I went quiet, and it wasn't because I didn't care. It's because I didn't know how to say what I was feeling. Or, I ghosted you, and I hate that I did that. It wasn't fair to you, and I'm really sorry. And if you're willing, I'd like to tell you what's going on inside of me. See, these aren't magic words. These won't erase the pain, but they can begin something new. They show that we're willing to come back with honesty, not with defensiveness, but with self-awareness, not just justification. And if we're the ones who have been ghosted, it can be equally hard to hold the silence without letting it calcify into resentment. See, we might feel abandoned, confused, and enraged. We might even question our own worth. We might tell ourselves that we must have done something wrong. And that pain is valid. But what if, in some cases, the silence wasn't about us? What if their disappearance was more about their shame than our value? More about their overwhelm than our shortcomings? See, that it doesn't mean that we're excusing harmful behavior, but it does mean that we're holding space for nuance. And we recognize that, right? We recognize that relationships even broken ones, are rarely simple. And when we begin to speak again, our goal is not perfection. It's, can we be present in this moment? Because ghosting is really a form of absence. And healing begins with presence, not with a perfect apology, not with dramatic gestures, but just presence. A voice where there was silence, right? An attempt where there was avoidance once, a willingness to hold tension instead of running away from it. We also have to remember that not every relationship can or should be repaired. And that's not the same as saying none of them can, right? Some people will welcome us back with grace, and some won't. Some will have boundaries, and some will be wary, and all of that is okay. What matters, though, is that we show up with truth. What matters is that we stop abandoning ourselves, because that's often what ghosting really is. Not just disappearing from someone else, but disappearing from our own selves, from the parts of us that want to stay in integrity, and from the parts of us that also want to heal. See, we ghost when we can't bear to see what's broken inside of us. But the only way to heal it is to see it, to bring light into that space, to say, I went silent, and here's why. And here's what I want to do differently now. That's where intimacy begins again. Because intimacy does not require perfection. It requires being present. It requires this willingness to speak what's real, even if it's messy, even if it's late, even if it's fragile and vulnerable. And that's what we'll begin, that's I think where we ought to begin practicing now. There's something redemptive that happens when we speak truth out loud, especially when that truth has been buried beneath silence. When we say, I disappeared because I was overwhelmed, or I couldn't respond because I felt too ashamed, or I ghosted you, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to stay. These words don't undo the pain, but they may open the door. They bring back humanity into a space where only absence once took realm. They say, I see what I did, and I'm not hiding anymore. That is integrity there. Because integrity does not mean that we never mess up. It means that we own the moments when we do mess up. We bring our full selves into the room, even when our full selves are scared, even when our full selves feel flawed and uncertain. That's the kind of presence that we want to build here at Bintegers. It's a space where real people get to speak real words without needing to first be perfect. And when it comes to ghosting, that kind of space is crucial. Because ghosting is not just about about avoiding conflict. It's about emotional capacity. It's about our nervous system's overwhelm. It's about the shame that closes down our throats and silences our hands. So what does this look like, this healing? It starts small and quiet and gentle. Maybe a text or a voice memo, a message that simply says, I'm here. I wasn't before, but I'd like to try again. It's about reaching out again. Not to demand like the reconnection, but to reestablish honesty. It shows that we're willing to see what we didn't know how to face before. And if we're the ones who've been ghosted, healing may look like setting boundaries, but also choosing compassion over narrative. Recognizing that silence may come from pain and not punishment, and allowing ourselves to feel the grief without turning it into a story of unworthiness. Because ghosting can make us question everything, right? Was I not enough? Did they ever care about me? why didn't they say goodbye? And the truth is, at least in most cases, it really wasn't about us. It was about the storm that they were carrying, the silence that they had inherited, the language that they'd never really learned to speak. Now, that does not make it okay, but it does make it human. And that's what we're returning to, right? Not perfect communication, not emotional mastery, not just this presentation of polish, but humanity. The kind that says, I'm overwhelmed, but I'm still here. The kind that says, I didn't handle that well, but can I try again? The kind that says, I'm learning how to stay present even when this is hard. Because staying present is hard, especially when we've learned to disappear as a form of self-protection. But every time we choose to speak instead of vanish, every time we choose to explain instead of retreat, every time we choose to stay, even through discomfort, we're beginning to rewire our story. We're choosing to break the pattern. We're practicing what intimacy looks like again. And we are reclaiming the parts of us that once believed that silence was the only option. So wherever you are in this process, ghosted or ghosting, hear me on this one here. You're not beyond repair. You're not disqualified from connection. And you're not unworthy because you disappeared. You're a fellow human being. And healing is possible. It may take time. It may take awkwardness. It may take learning again how to use your voice slowly and imperfectly. But it is worth it, because ghosting does not have to be the end of the story. It can be the space between chapters. And the next chapter, it can be written in your own voice, with you being present in that moment, with courageousness, and with quiet, brave acts of saying, I am still here. My dear listener, you've got this. Let me know in the comments how this landed for you. See you in the next episode.